Welcome to HSM Specials. I have the pleasure to be here today with Professor Michael Porter of the Harvard Business School, the world's leading thinker on strategy. Professor Porter, thank you for being in our program.
My pleasure.
Professor Porter, what has changed in strategy thinking the past few years?
Well, I think the biggest thing that probably has been stimulating a lot of thinking is the difficult economic environment. We've had a whole new era of thinking about what do you do in a crisis? What do you do when the market really drops? What do you do when demand drops? And I think there's been a lot of new ideas and thinking about how when you're in a crisis, the worst thing to do is just to withdraw. The most important thing to do is to use the crisis as an opportunity to reposition the company, get things done, move the business forward. So I think that's been probably the the most vivid trend or the most vivid characteristic of the last few years. I'm seeing a new movement in strategy, which is to better link strategy and society. I think that there's a growing recognition, I think, among more and more people that we have some important problems in the world. Particularly the younger people are very concerned about those problems: poverty, health, and in the environment, many other areas. And I think there's some new ideas and new thinking emerging about how to sort of integrate better the economic and the social into an integrated view of how the company operates. And this is something that I've been writing about recently and continue to write about.
Mm-hmm. You have always taken the strategy concept to different levels, to the levels of countries, to the levels of healthcare, to the levels of social responsibility. What are you working on now?
Well, the healthcare problems in virtually every country in the world are still keeping me very, very busy. I started my healthcare work focusing on advanced economies. More recently, I've started a body of work with colleagues at the Harvard Medical School on developing healthcare in very poor countries, which uses a lot of the same principles but has some different issues. And so this continues to be probably maybe the largest single body of new work right now. But to the point I made earlier, I think I've been working very, very hard lately on the question of how do companies actually influence the economic development of their community. Mm-hmm. And I think the traditional aid model hasn't worked too well. Mm-hmm. We've had these institutions since World War II, the World Bank and the UNDP, and every country has foreign aid, and there's all kinds of schemes to do economic development, but the current model isn't working. And I think that getting the private sector to play and figuring out how the private sector can work collaboratively with other parts of society, I think is again a frontier issue that I've been spending a lot of time on.
Professor Porter, your 5 forces model is probably the most recognized model on strategy in the world. And you rewrote. You wrote a new edition of your book, and you had an introduction talking about it. Mm-hmm. What's your current thinking on the 5 forces?
Well, the 5 forces model is of course a way of thinking very broadly and very fundamentally about the nature of competition in any particular business. You can apply it to products or services. You can even apply it to nonprofits who are really competing for customers, for funders. So in some sense, they have a business as well. What the 5 forces tries to do is it tries to abstract away from the details of any given moment in time or any given state of technology or any given trend in the marketplace and really try to ask the question, what are really the underlying economic drivers here? About a year and a half ago, I did a kind of major review of all the work that I'd done on 5 forces and industry analysis, looked at the literature, and went through a long process of kind of asking myself, gee, do I need to update this model? Do I need to add dimensions to it? And there has been some interesting learning. I think the biggest change that's happened that affects that framework is, it used to be that we thought about economies of scale on the supply side, economies of scale in terms of of getting into the market, having to have a big factory or a big supply chain. I think over the last 15 or 20 years, what's become much more important is economies of scale on the demand side, the so-called network effect, and the degree to which a company can create a network of customers, which then make it very hard for another company to penetrate that market. So that is, I think, an important dimension, and when I rewrote and republished my original Five Forces concepts, I added that dimension. But otherwise, I'm very, very confident from working in hundreds and hundreds of industries that the basic underlying fundamentals of industry competition are invariant of time. But what confuses people sometimes is that the given moment that we're in creates all kinds of new possibilities. Those possibilities make competition change very differently, but the underlying fundamental structure is basically the same.
How not to get distracted on thinking about strategy? Because the offering is so huge on different models and different names and blue ocean and red ocean and whatever.
Well, I think, frankly, I think a lot of the work on strategy falls into one of two categories. Number one, it's a sort of a repackaging of what's already been said. So, you know, the blue ocean is a nice metaphor. It says, you know, go where your competitors are not. Gee, it sounds like we've been talking about that for many years. That's not what I would call really a new framework or a new theory. That's just an interesting new metaphor. It gives managers a new way of kind of encouraging them to look for open space in the market. I think it's been helpful. I can see why managers find it helpful. Managers are always looking for a new sort of way to prompt new thinking, you know, to kind of stretch themselves a little bit. And so sometimes there's nothing really fundamentally or strategically or theoretically different, but basically it's useful because it prompts managers in the new direction. The other tendency in the field of strategy is to pick on one trend and make it into a whole theory. So whether it's execution or outsourcing or globalization or bottom of the pyramid, there's a lot of work in the field that really doesn't try to capture the, if you will, a holistic view, but tries to identify important critical areas that need attention, that are part of the whole, but they need more attention. So again, I think the bottom of the pyramid type work is very helpful because there's an enormous market, and most companies, certainly from the advanced world, don't really think about that market. They don't think about that as an opportunity. They just resell the same products they produced, you know, in New York City. And it's actually very challenging to rethink your product for a very different customer set. So I think that's been very useful work. So I find, I don't think there's too many new comprehensive views of strategy right now, but I think there's always going to be, the market for ideas is a very, very efficient market, and there's always people out there with ideas, and business people are hungry for new ways of thinking. So I think the field is pretty healthy, but I wish we would see a little bit more fundamental research, and I wish the academic community, frankly, would get back into the strategy debate a little bit more vigorously. Most of the work that's related to strategy over the last 10 years or so has been done really outside of the academic. It's been done by journalists. It's been done by, you know, thoughtful observers, consultants, and I think the academic sort of scholarly approach that really looks at rigorous data and uses rigorous methods and draws on kind of discipline frameworks is a very powerful tool. There's still lots of questions to be asked about strategy and answered.
One of the biggest nightmares of all managers is probably making your strategy work. You know, what you call implementation. You call that implementation many years ago. People are talking about execution, right?
There's an example of how an idea that's an important idea gets kind of repackaged so that it's more vivid and fresh, and that happens a lot.
And how to implement your strategy or how to execute your strategy? What are the factors that you have to think to not get lost in the way?
Well, I think first of all, you know, there has to be clarity on what the strategy is and what we mean by the strategy. And as you know, because you and I spend time together a lot, there's a lot of people that use the word strategy to mean a lot of different things. And so I think that frankly, one of the key steps in successful strategy is to get everybody on the same page and have a common understanding of what you're talking about. And that leads to really a second sort of critical area, which is communication. That is that lots and lots of people in the organization have to understand the strategy. They have to understand, you know, who the target customer is, what needs the company's trying to meet, how it's trying to be unique, how it's trying to deliver something different, how that compares to the rivals. And that's just not the top management that needs to know that. It's the person that's making the sales call needs to know that. The person that's answering the phone, you know, at the call center needs to understand that. The person that's out there in the laboratory trying to develop the next product in the product line. So I think, first of all, common understanding, common framework for thinking, then very clear communication, and this is where the CEO or the leader is particularly responsible. The CEO has to be repeating over and over again, here's what we are, here's why we're different, here's what we're trying to distinguish ourselves in doing. And then I think making sure that you have metrics for measurement that are actually tied to your strategy, not just general metrics that sort of everybody uses or any company could use. And by the way, the capital markets, the financial markets tend to impose general metrics on the company. They tend to use certain metrics, you know, sales per, you know, same store sales or you know, revenue per employee. They tend to use general metrics and really apply those to every company in the sector or field. A good strategy requires really metrics tailored to the particular strategy. So if HSM, your company that's putting on these wonderful events around the world that I'm participating in many times, you know, there's an organization that's really seeking a senior management audience that's trying to provide really the best ideas. It's trying to provide an incredible customer experience for the participants. It's trying to get the most cutting-edge speakers. Each of those determines some metrics that you would want to measure to see whether you're actually achieving the goal. So you've got to get this general kind of vague notion of strategy, and you've got to make it as concrete as possible and as clear as possible to as many people as possible in both qualitative and quantitative ways. And then I think also, you know, good leaders live out the strategy themselves in the way they behave and how they spend their time. And I've seen many cases where you'll see a good leader take a seemingly minor step, but the step just sends an incredible message about the strategy. So, you know, serving a customer, a step to serve a customer, where the leader will actually go the extra mile himself or herself to actually serve the customer in the way the company wants to stand for. So, I think this issue of execution or implementation or realization or whatever we want to call it is I think now you know, one of those areas that's just as important in a way as coming up with the strategy itself.
First part, just shifting subjects a little bit, talking about the United States. You wrote a few months ago a wonderful article that appeared on the cover of Business Week with proposition for a competitive model for the United States, which has suffered a little bit. So the first question is, has the United States lost its strategy a little bit? Second, if President Obama would name Professor Porter the Minister of Strategy for the United States, what would you do?
Well, I don't know if I should be horrified or excited about that. I would encourage any of our viewers to go and read that article because it's not very long and it really does try to synthesize a perspective about the trajectory of the U.S. As a nation and as a very competitive nation historically. I think that the U.S. has this incredible vitality and incredible dynamism, but it has faced kind of growing constraints that are holding that back. I think, to me, the most visible of those and the most scariest of those is the labor force. We just don't have a high enough quality labor force, and we have all kinds of problems with getting people graduate from high school and so forth. But and there's a creeping cost of doing business in the U.S., which is getting higher and higher and higher. I don't see yet the administration really tackling these issues. I think the administration is still really focused on the economic downturn, pumping up demand. If I could get in a role where I was, kind of chief strategist for the U.S., I think the priorities are pretty straightforward. I laid them out in the article. We have to we have to review our whole approach to regulating business. It's broken.
To finalize, Professor Porter, we, a few years ago, we started the concept of BRIC,
Mm-hmm.
Brazil, Russia, India, and
Mm-hmm.
China. But only India and China really took the lead.
Mm-hmm.
Brazil and Russia were not a little outside of the game. Now Brazil is back in
Yep.
the game. Russia seems to be out of this
Yep.
competitiveness. How do you see all that as everybody says that the next wave of growth will be in the emerging countries?
Yeah. Well, I think that I think you're correct in that of the so-called BRIC countries. I think the one that's clearly the caboose on the train, that's not moving is Russia. Russia's still stuck in the same broken, resource-driven, top-down, socio-political, economic time warp that and hasn't really taken many of the steps necessary to create a really competitive economy. Ironically, Russia could be an innovative powerhouse. Russia has a lot of best scientists and the best technology and the best engineering and the highest level of education and PhDs and so they have these precious assets, that all these other countries would just die for. But yet the system is completely dysfunctional, and it's not that big. Russia's a big country. There's a lot of resources there. There's a lot of money being made in Russia, but Russia's not going anywhere right now. This new president is actually starting to talk in an encouraging way, but Russia has lost 4 or 5 years. That they started some reform and then when they got rich again, quote unquote, because the oil price went up and resource price when they got rich again, they stopped really reforming. Brazil, I think, is now finally, I think, taken its place as a true BRIC country. I think, as we were talking earlier, I think Brazil's on the move. I think Brazil has pretty stable leadership. I think Brazil has a strong base of talent and skill and entrepreneurship and innovation. I think Brazil has the advantage over China of much more pluralism, much more democratic, much more open, much more bottoms up. I think that will stand Brazil in good stead. I think, again, Brazil, to me, the biggest weaknesses of Brazil are this kind of deadening bureaucracy and complexity that surrounds everything. I mean, I went through the airport in São Paulo today, and it was an embarrassment. I mean, it wasn't a first world country; it was a third world country. It was like being in Africa. It was poorly managed. The people were the supervisors were standing around. They weren't working. There was no concern about the passenger experience. There was no concern about efficiency. There was no concern about using people's time. It was just acting out the same old, tired, third world type approach. And that mentality is still too strong in Brazil. It's particularly in government. And so I think, whereas China is much more action oriented. They fix things. They change things. Sometimes they trash, human rights in the process, which makes us all uncomfortable. India lumbers along with a lot of complexity. But Brazil should be able to make much more rapid progress than India. India is hugely complicated compared to Brazil, but But and so the question is, how can you kind of preserve the stability um, in policy, but yet start to deal with some of these things that now are the new challenge. It used to be in Brazil, it was the challenge was just having basic stable policies and having sound macro and all that. Brazil's got all that. Now we got to move to that next level. So I think Brazil's going to do very well. It is doing very well, and but I hope that the Brazilian business community and the kind of greater civic society here will not get too satisfied. You know, what it worries me a little bit that too many Brazilians have their chests stuck out now, and that's always a little bit dangerous in any country.
That's right. Professor Porter, thank you so much for your contribution to our viewers, and appreciate your coming to Brazil again. Thank you
My
very much.
pleasure, Jose. Thank you.